on the expensive mic today. I might sound a little different. Hey, I wrote this shit for Ronnie, just know I'm here for you, brother. Reminiscing on them days when I shed a tear for you, brother. Know the toughest days you've been through are in the rear for you, brother. God moves on his own time, and he made it clear to you, brother. See the finish line. I visualize realities I wanted, then invented mine. It ain't how you start, it's how you finish. Word to the scrimmage line. Luckily, my hustle is my passion. This shit intertwined.
Welcome back. Happy Monday, everybody. It is episode number 28 of the Coach's Corner podcast. My right-hand man here, as always, Mike Anderson. And today we got a special guest, Bradley Roth. Bradley here helps people launch podcasts and is more so kind of on the coaching side of, helping people get their podcasts up and running. So super interesting, topic. Glad to have you here and excited to dive in here.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you guys having me on. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So let's just dive on into it. Obviously, this is kind of cool because me and Brad, we haven't talked here before, neither has Mike, so we're all kind of like networking, meeting each other here. So should be a cool conversation, but really interested to know, just kind of like the background into how you got to where you are. I know you mentioned to me, your prior experience was kind of like in the fitness space, but where did the entire journey, start, maybe even take it back to like high school?
Yeah, no, I'll try to sum it up best I can. And I always do end up going back to like high school and before that, because growing up, my interests and kind of what I was into, who I was really all about sports and being an athlete. That was kind of like my whole identity, really. I didn't have a whole lot of like outside interests besides that. Through high school, I did track, high jump, long jump, had the ability to do that in college, but didn't. Kind of did my own thing, got really into lifting and fitness, and ended up, in college, I was like, all I knew was I didn't want to work at a desk. And I'm looking through the list of majors, and I was like, man, I don't know what I want to do, but I really like working out. So I'm going to be an exercise science major, or strength and conditioning to be more specific. But I ended up doing that and got out of college. I got really into CrossFit at the time. And there was this gym back home that I really wanted to, like by my hometown, that I really wanted to coach at, but I had like zero coaching experience. My biggest fear growing up was any sort of like public speaking or being in front of the class or anything like that. Like if I had to talk to, like make a presentation in high school or even college, I would be like, I wouldn't sleep for like the whole week leading up to it. I get up, I'd be all shaky. So like, I never really imagined I would be like leading groups in any way. But then I just kind of had this like obsession with what I want to do with CrossFit and that, and just kind of like broke down the owner of the gym through persistence, and he gave me a shot, even though I was like, again, very kind of quiet, timid in the beginning. And so they kind of gave me an internship, and where I was kind of helping out, and then slowly moved me to like where I was on my own. And then I started coaching these group classes that were anywhere from like, I don't know, say like 5 to 30 plus people. So I ended up doing that for 5 years, just over 5 years. And over that time, definitely got like, the learning curve was huge, got way, way better over time, not just at like presenting, but also cues, like how you interact with people, right, is a huge part of coaching. So going from like, do this to like, asking them a question that's going to help them figure out what to do. Right. And kind of just like the whole approach, learning how to make connections with people. I remember we would bring people through this program called On-Ramp, where you kind of teach them a lot of like the basic movements before they go into the class. And I got pulled into the office one day. I was like, I don't know, by like one of the owners. And I was like, oh, like what's going on? They're like, your people who come through On-Ramp with you. There was like a few other trainers who kind of did the same thing, the part-time trainers. And they were like, the ones that come through with you, like that retention rate is so much higher. Like are you doing anything different? Like what are you spending your time on, focusing on? Because we kind of had a curriculum that they gave us. And I said, I realized that the key there is basically like, it can be really intimidating for someone who's like out of shape. They come in, they're learning these new movements, and they go into this class where like all these people know each other. They've been doing it for so long. And so I was like, I just want to make them feel like they can trust someone here. and build a relationship. So like we go through like the movements and stuff like that, but I always had like a big focus on like getting to know the person. So I'd ask them kind of questions about, you know, not just their fitness background, but kind of outside of the gym, like what do they do, a little bit about their family, kind of find something that's like, you know, some sort of commonality, hone in on that. And then like they feel like, okay, like I got this person here, like even if he's not in class with me when I go off to class, like, you know, the people here, like I'm connected in some way. And so that was kind of like the key is, and that was kind of a light bulb moment for me because I think at the time I didn't even realize I was doing it consciously, but having them kind of ask me about it, I think was kind of a turning point. So that kind of was like a light bulb light bulb moment for me. And from there, I realized that I did like really connecting with people, which I think any good coach has to be able to really connect with whoever they're coaching, right? Like that's a huge integral skill. Like I see a lot of coaches, you know, not just in kind of the space I'm in now, but back there in the fitness space who were like super knowledgeable. They were super ripped, super in shape themselves, but they couldn't like connect or relate with their clients or the people they were coaching. And so there was always that huge disconnect. Whereas you could have someone, you know, I've seen people who like really aren't that like technically sound or anything, but they have like all these clients who love them because they're great at like connecting with the people. So I think there's those two sides of coaching, right? There's like the kind of the people side, and then there's your expertise side, and kind of finding that middle ground is key. So that really kind of gave me the foundations of my coaching experience. Obviously that expertise side changes kind of depending on what you're doing, like podcasting versus like CrossFit is two totally different realms, but that like kind of the people part of it is still kind of the same. So I got out of the gym because we moved away and I kind of jumped into entrepreneurship. I had no idea what I was doing, made a whole bunch of mistakes. I kind of got into the service side for a while, trying to go B2B, social media marketing and that kind of stuff for local businesses. And I did that for a few years, but I never really kind of like got traction with it. I never really felt like aligned. And it took me a while of kind of like self-work. And, you know, back, I think it was 2018, I started to really get into, you know, I went to a Tony Robbins event and that kind of really kicked off my personal development journey and learning about kind of myself and my weak points and understanding psychology, not just my own, but other people's, and kind of took things to a whole nother level. But like, even then I'm doing all this work, I was still feeling really misaligned doing this like service business because it was like kind of impersonal. It's all about numbers. You know, it's really hard to connect with the business owners. They don't really want, like, they just see you as kind of like, you know, a number or whatever. Whereas, you know, coaching is kind of more personal, I think. So finally, after really kind of holding back with my wanting to do a podcast, like I had the concept, the podcast is called Not Most People. I had the concept in my head for like 3-4 years. I didn't know what I wanted to do with it. I was kind of scared to do anything with it. I got into this group called the Arate Syndicate, which is like a mastermind, like high level Andy Frisella, Ed Milet, maybe you guys have heard of them, coaching group. And everyone in there is like podcasters. And I'm like, okay, this is kind of different because I thought at the time that like only people like the Andys of the world had podcasts. Like it was only for like big time celebrities and stuff. And so I got in there and I saw, okay, these people are doing it. Maybe I can do it. And I went on a couple as a guest. Again, like I gotten over my fear of public speaking to a degree, like in the fitness sense, because I was like, okay, this is my expertise. I know these people, that kind of stuff. But I was still like terrified to put myself out there, like for the world to listen to, you know? And, I went on a podcast. First one really didn't go very well. I was like, I don't think I'm going to ever do this. I got invited on another one. I was like, all right, I'll give this one more shot. Had a great time, kind of like really connected with the host and all that. And then I got off and I said, okay, I think I'm going to start a podcast. And luckily, you know, I look back and I'm like, I feel like I kind of wasted a few years trying to kind of force that service business. But at the same time, it gave me the marketing skills to become a successful podcaster and kind of create that brand and really dial that in. So I ended up launching my podcast a little over a year ago. And I had known in my gut for a while that where I wanted to be was more in the coaching and personal development space. I just didn't know how at the time. And I started this podcast, started getting all kinds of like positive feedback, like, oh, you sound like you've been doing this forever. How do I do it? And that kind of stuff. And I had enough people ask me to where I was like, you know what, maybe I should help people with this. And so I created a course. Some people bought the course, but like any online course, the majority of them never get gone through because there's not that accountability. There's not that, like, there's no pressure. It's like, oh, I'll get to it when I get to it. So looking at that, I said, okay, what can I create that's like, because it's great if people buy my course, but it's way better if they actually like launch their podcast and that kind of thing. So I said, what can I create that's a little bit different? And so I created more of like a coaching accelerator program, like a lot more like live coaching, because I realized like, the course is cool, but I really love connecting with people one-on-one and being able to kind of like, I mean, that's what people really pay for when it comes to coaching is personalization, right? So like being able to work with people individually, answer all those like little million questions you would never think of when it comes to podcasting, be able to kind of share my direct experience and that kind of stuff. So it was really not something I planned. It just kind of happened organically. And I think that's coaching in general, right? Like we're all coaches kind of from our own experience, our own past experience. So that's kind of my 10-minute version of how I got to where I am today.
No, I love it. I love it. No, I mean, even going back, it's funny because like as soon as you started talking, you mentioned, just kind of like what your interests were, working out, stuff like that. That was like the key to, exercise, sports science, or strength and conditioning, So, it's funny because like I feel like I resonate a lot with it because, kind of like how I got to where I am, to be honest, too, because I went to college. I went to study marine science. I was really interested in surfing. That's really all I gave a shit about. Didn't really care about like the water, which really like threw me off because when I got into class, I was like, "Whoa, what the hell? Like this isn't surfing." Like
I thought this was
like,
surfing class.
Yeah, this is like studying coral reefs and shit. Like what the hell, So it's kind of funny, but just kind of similar interest in getting there. But it made me think about it too because. I went to Coastal Carolina University, and so many people there were exercise, sports science, strength and conditioning. Like they're basically going to school to be a PE teacher, or a personal trainer, which like both of them didn't really make sense to me. But it was funny because there were so many people there that were it's the same thing. They were all just really interested in getting big. They didn't really think about like what the career was. So it just started to make me think about like why we make decisions, because of like our interests, but we don't really realize like that it really has nothing to do with what we're really interested in, so it's funny. But even just kind of like your journey, man, like me and Mike, we did pretty much like the same thing. Like we were very service based, like started to realize like, okay, these business owners can kind of be jackasses and, they really don't care about people at all. It's like kind of weird, and that's, we worked with like a handful of, coaches and same type of thing. We're like, damn, like, number one, these people like really like to help people, but at the same time, there's so many interests. Like you're talking about like, just kind of like the Tony Robbins side of thing, like, learning about not only like how to benefit or better yourself, but also, like how you start to see like other people's errors, like you start to be like, man, like if you just shifted this one little thing, like your life would probably drastically change. And they're like, what? Oh, like it doesn't even resonate, so it's kind of funny, but yeah, just kind of like, just that whole journey itself, I definitely think, I mean, a lot of it's the same, it's kind of funny. But to your point, you mentioned, like, I feel like I wasted a bunch of time, on the marketing stuff, like I thought about this, a lot too, because even with like what we do here with the podcast, sometimes I'm like, why do we do these interviews? Why do we do this stuff? And like Mike and I, we have a lot of shit tied in the back of it. Like number one, like it's a huge source of content for us, like we get tons of content just by recording the podcast, even if the interview is bad. But to your point, it's really like networking with people and stuff like that. And, just, learning about what other people do, how they help people, and, see if there's any collaboration in between the two, where can that relationship go? So, I think there's like just a lot to be said with everything you said about your story, as far as, just kind of like, let it play out, let it all play out, really like go after like what you're really interested in, and challenge yourself too. You mentioned not being a good public speaker, all that type of stuff. Like, I feel like that's why I really like doing this stuff, is because, like I said, the content, networking, there's so many benefits, but at the same time, it's like reps with just like speaking, becoming a good storyteller, things like that. And I think that's honestly like the biggest thing that you probably realize is like you enjoyed, like connecting with people and telling stories about, like your journey as well, and like that's ultimately like why you wanted to share it, things like that. So I mean, just to back out of that, I mean, I think the biggest thing is like, just putting yourself out there and trying different things is like one of the biggest things that I feel like we all lose, like going through typical society, it's like just hammer down, like this is your only option. I'm sure that's how you ended up in college, and just the whole career really, so it's cool to hear.
Yeah, that last part that you mentioned is really a big part of kind of the whole not most people philosophy that I built the brand on. It's like this kind of challenging of like conventional norms or like society, like what they're trying to teach you. Like I went to school purely because my parents are like, you're going to school,
Yep.
like it wasn't like really my choice. I had a blast. Was it worth the money for what I learned? Not even close, So,
Lots
but yeah,
of fun.
exactly. But yeah, it's challenging that kind of just like conventional thinking. And that was something that through all of that kind of self-discovery and coaching and all that kind of stuff kind of came to the surface for me. Like I always kind of asked why, always question things. And that's one thing I've drilled in my podcast and just to people in general. Like I just turned 30 and I've been the last 5 or 6 years, like after probably 4 or 5 years, like since getting out of coaching, like, cause originally I thought that's what I was going to do forever. Like when I got into it, I loved it. I was like, this is going to be my career. I'm going to open a gym one day. And then again, you stay open-minded, like other things kind of come across your path and then you just got to kind of follow them. But like, I was still feeling like, man, I've been trying this kind of entrepreneurship thing for like 4 or 5 years now. And I feel like more lost than when I started and stuff like that. And it's just, you got to keep on trying, like trying different things. Like that's one of my biggest frustrations with people, especially like a lot of our friends, like me and my wife's friends, they're, late 20s, 30, around there. And they're kind of at that point where it's like, do I kind of go for it now and try something new before I have kids and settle down? Or do I kind of just like continue this career path and I don't really feel fulfilled and all this stuff? And I'm like, man, you guys got to like, just try stuff, get out there and try things. Like, I think that career, like you pick one thing and you stick with it forever. Like that worked 20, 30, 40 years ago. And it's like, now there's the way the world works. Like there's so many different options and you have access to so much information, right? Like we could get really into it with coaching about like online courses and how that has kind of changed the game and everything. Like just because, 10 years ago, coaching was like a sports thing. Pretty much for the most part. Right. And now there's coaches for everything, right? Podcasting. Like who would have thought like, oh, there's podcast coaches. So like the game has changed, the world has changed. And it's like, you don't have to stick to that. Like, and the way you find out what you want to do and what you're good at is by trying things.
Yeah.
So that's just kind of, I kind of like beat a dead horse with that message, but because I say it so much, but it's something that people need to really, do, like experiment, learn while you still can.
Yeah. And I actually just got off a client call like right before we hopped on this podcast that was just talking about like transition, because it was one of our clients who's like making a complete like offer pivot. And like all the fear and anxiety that goes around something like that, where you're starting this whole new thing. And it's like, is this going to resonate? Is it something that people even want? And I think it's like, obviously there's been a lot of transitions with you and your career as well as us in our career of just like pivoting into different offers, pivoting into different businesses, whatever the case may be. And it's like, I think people just have to trust like in their intuition to an extent. It's like when you just know, like, I want to do this, if there's a but, then the but is pretty irrelevant. You know what I mean? Like if you say like, I want to do this, but maybe I should stay comfortable in this job, like that but is just there from society. That but isn't there because like you truly believe it, The first part of that sentence is usually what you want and what you want to pursue. You add a but to it because the buts are coming from these other circumstances, society, like what your parents are telling you, what your friends are telling you, whatever the case may be. So I think it's like one of those things where to what you were mentioning about like your friends, it's one of those things that I think people just get constantly stuck in that loophole of just like, I want to do this, but this is why I can't do it, and
Yeah.
you need to do it. Just like you said, it's like, you just won't know. And even with, when I was talking to this client, it was like, well, at the end of the day, like we've come to the discovery that you don't want to do what you're currently doing, and you have this idea of this other thing. So like, we need to bridge the gap and not do this anymore and start doing this and see what happens, you know? And like any sort of fear and anxiety around that, it's always going to be there. So we might as well just address it and move forward. You know what I mean? So it's always interesting to look at stuff like that.
Yeah. I feel like there's kind of two levels to it, right? Like level 2, which is kind of what you're talking about, is like, okay, I want to do this, but like you have an idea of that other thing you want to do. And then level 1 is like people who are like, well, I don't want to do what I'm doing, but I have no idea what else I'd want to do.
Exactly.
You know? And so you kind of have to like do that self, discovery, or like figure out, just like try different things to figure out, okay, what's that thing I want to maybe try? And then you run into all those kind of subconscious beliefs and stuff too. And then you got to kind of like, so it's kind of almost like look external to find those other things. And then when you hit that resistance, then you go internal. And
Yeah,
that makes sense.
100%. No, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I like one thing that came to mind too. I was listening to a podcast this morning. It was actually Andy Frisella and his Real AF podcast. So I can't remember who the guest was, but the guest said it specifically. And he was talking about the Fifth Agreement, the book. And
Kyle Creek was the guest.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's talking about, like basically there's a difference between skepticism and closed-mindedness, and I was like, fuck, man, that like really rang a bell in my head. I was like, damn, that's so true. Like there's a lot of people that are closed-minded, like they just won't, like they don't want to hear what you're telling them, and like there's there's the other side of it where it's like there's some skepticism where it's like, I don't know, that could work out, like, or no, I'm not sure, but like, let me, I'm questioning it, it's like one of those things. And I think like, that's like, it's funny that this is coming up too, because that's like exactly how Mike and I got to this position. Like I mean, like our business was fucking crushing it. And Mike's like, dude, like, let's just like drop all of this and like start coaching people. And I was like, what? Like, what the fuck are you talking about, dude? like we have our business is crushing, and like, but like I said earlier, it was that like kind of like fulfillment thing that we were really battling. Like the people that we were working with weren't really like the, aligned with like with the people that we really wanted to work with,
Right.
And like the coaching side of things, we had dabbled in it a little bit. We had worked with some people that had amazing results and like we're super stoked and the relationship was amazing. So it's like, which one do we really chase? Like this is, it's working really, really well, but like there's still a missing piece here, here's like another side. And like that's almost like I was like, as soon as I heard that on the podcast this morning, I immediately thought about like this situation. I was like, dude, like that's literally it, like if I was closed-minded in that situation, we probably would have never made the move, or Mike would have broken off and done his own thing while I ran our original business, but like I was skeptical about it. I was like, that does sound pretty good, like maybe we should try it, and here we are, so it's kind of funny, but I thought that like the way that he explained that, like, that there, that difference, between skepticism and closed-minded, I was like, damn, like the world needs to hear that, like the world needs to like realize like, yo, you're being fucking closed-minded. And like we deal with it all the time, even like with clients and stuff, where it's like we'll say something and just like you guys are talking about the but, oh, I can't do that because but this, that I tried that, and it's like, dude, like you're being fucking closed-minded right now, like prove me wrong, prove me wrong that this shit's not gonna work, and I think that's like one of the biggest things too, is like people need to prove themselves wrong, like if like you were talking about, if you're in that position where like you don't like the career or you don't necessarily like the outlook that you're having right now with life, like, do something to change it, prove yourself wrong. Like, do you really not like it? Or is like, there's something else out there that could be a little bit greener for you? I think that's really important.
Yeah. I think, the subtleties, I've become more and more obsessed with subtleties, and like, because people have this tendency to generalize, right? Like you're either like a overly optimistic or you're like a total pessimist, right? There's no middle ground anymore. Like everything is kind of like divided, like black and white and like left and right. And like like two ends versus a whole spectrum, right?
Mhm.
Like I think usually the answer lies somewhere in the middle, and people, the middle is kind of uncertain. Like it's easier to just kind of pick one side a lot of times. But yeah, I think, there's optimism, there's pessimism, and then there's being a realist, right? And Andy's podcast, Real AF, like being a realist means sometimes you might look negatively at something, sometimes you might look positively at something, but it's that ability to kind of like not pick the same outlook every time.
Yeah.
Right? Like take each kind of instance and really like analyze it like in an unbiased way and do that. And I think that's kind of like a lost art. And I think that's kind of like, I feel like a lot of the role of coaches too is to get people to kind of like snap out of their thought pattern and to say like, okay, step back, like let's look at it from a new perspective, or like kind of detach from your emotions maybe a little bit and that kind of stuff, and look at it that way.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we always talk about that. Like that's one of my big things that I'm always reiterating is like making objective decisions instead of emotional decisions, especially in business, because if you make emotional decisions in business, for lack of a better word, you're pretty fucked at that point, because like emotions are not a game to play with business, and it's like, I think when you look at scenarios of like problem solving in business and outside of business, like in life in general, it's like if we look through a lens of emotion, then we're just projecting things that we've been through or circumstances or beliefs onto a scenario. Whereas when we look objectively, it's okay, let me step back, look at this, what are the facts? Like what's the next right move? And you can actually move through that scenario in the right way, So to your point, I do think that's like a huge aspect. And we always talk about with business, it's like business is mechanical, but the mind is what gets in the way. Like business, it's like you need people who are interested in what you do. You need to figure out how to find people that are interested in what you do. You need to be able to deliver what you do. You need to get them to buy what you do. Like there's like these just like couple different levels of like of business that are incredibly simple when you think about it. And it's just mechanical. You build a system around that and you're good. But the problem is like we get in our own way in that process, So like I'm always like reiterating that with our community is just like you have to step out of emotion and be able to drop into a place of objective, like it's not here nor there. It's just like looking at the facts, looking at the scenario, the data, whatever you can look at that's like logical in a sense, and just making the next right decision without emotion,
Yeah, it's another one of those things I feel like we could like get into the subtleties of, right? Like the whole logic versus emotion thing, because I think about that a lot because I'm naturally like a very logical person.
Yeah.
But also like emotions are energy in motion. And so it's like if you don't have an emotion behind that, like you're not going to go anywhere. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It's one of those things that kind of puts my mind in a pretzel thinking about it. Kind of this like, yeah, you don't want to make decisions when you don't want your emotions to take over and make the decisions for you.
Yeah.
But you have to have emotion behind what you're doing, and you have to like understand emotions in business and marketing and that kind of stuff. And especially if you're coaching anyone, because emotions are going to be a part of it, no matter kind of what it is. Like you give people the mechanics all day, but if they're emotionally in the wrong spot, or if you're kind of on a different wavelength and you're not understanding and you're not resonating with them and that kind of stuff, like, all the logic and that kind of stuff doesn't matter if you're not connected emotionally first. So it's
100%.
again, it's one of those like kind of chicken or the egg things to me a little bit. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, going back to what you're saying about the answers kind of being somewhere in the middle, like, I don't know if you guys find that a lot, but like with podcasting, for instance, there's so like podcasting is kind of like in a gold rush right now. Like everyone's getting in the podcasting game. It's blowing up. And there's a lot of people out there who are like, oh yeah, anyone and everyone should go start a podcast. And I don't believe that to necessarily be true. Right. A lot of those people are trying to sell things. And then there's a lot of people who are like, oh, you shouldn't podcast, like it's only for whatever, big time people, influencers, and it's going to be a waste of time and all that kind of stuff. And again, the answer lies usually somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And it's kind of helping people figure out, where they fall in that spectrum.
Yeah. And that's exactly like where me and Mike were with it too. Like, are we good enough for this? Like, should we do this? Or are we looked at somebody that's like, you should do this, But like, I think that's like the biggest thing too, is like, just like you guys are talking about, like, we always try and talk about the fact of like removing yourself from the outcome, and like, that's a lot of like what I try and tell myself over and over and over again, you know, like, and my girlfriend like always like shits on me about it, because she's like, you have no emotion, you know, and I'm just like, no,
Yeah.
I mean, I just like accept the fact that like it is what it is, you know, whatever happens, you know. Like she's like, it's funny because she like, I feel like a lot of women are like this, but but you know, she's definitely like one of those like, you know, the world's ending right now type of thing. And I'm like, yo, chill. Like, it's just like your nail broke, you know, like, fuck, you know, it's not that big of a deal.
I know.
But
It's like,
it's
why
funny
aren't you reacting right now? Like, where
Yeah.
are you? Like, yeah. I'm like, I'm analyzing it. Don't help.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Give me a minute.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think it's just like one of those things where it's like, you know, kind of like what you were saying from the beginning, you know, like if you didn't take chances and like remove yourself from the outcome, you would have never ended up here, you know, as far as like the podcasting stuff. And you know, like with whatever it comes into, like, you know, like even on Mike and I's side of things, like, you know, the first time like we talked about spending money on ads, you know, like it was one of those things where it's like, all right, yeah, you know, like $5,000 is a lot of money, you know, but like what's the worst thing that could happen, you know? And it's like, all right, we lose 5K. What's the best thing that could happen? We make more than 5K. All right, cool. Let's fucking try it, you know, and see what happens, you know? And so I think like that's kind of the thing too, is like also, you know, removing yourself from the outcome is a big thing. But if you can like look at, you know, the two sides and like, okay, what's the outcome that I really want to go after? Like, I want to make more money. So like, let me risk it, you know, like I know, like, you know, if I don't spend it, I'm just going to stay here type of thing. Or if I lose it, like, I'm just going to stay here type of thing. So, you know, like, I think that's the biggest thing too, like going to your point, as far as like acquaintances, you know, I feel like I know a lot of people in that position too, just specifically like, you know, that are local here, you know, where I live. And, you know, they're in that position where it's like they see people like me, you know, people on social media, you know, where they're like they're doing their thing, you know, you can tell like they're not like billionaires, you know, millionaires, but at the same time like they're living life on their terms. And like you can tell like they want it, you know, like they want to try something, like they're trying to figure it out, but like they're just stuck. And I think that was like the biggest thing that I'm like super grateful for is like number one, I was expelled from college. So, you know, when I got into business, I really had nothing to lose, you know. It was just a situation of like fuck it, you know. I'm already at rock bottom, you know. What is there to, how much lower can I go, you know? So like people, I think that's a big thing too, is like I accepted that, you know, like I could have just kept my route with, you know, I managed a Nautica store, you know, at the outlets in Myrtle Beach. So, you know, like I could have had a job, you know, for the rest of my life. Was this something that I wanted to do? Absolutely not. And that's like, that's what I accepted, you know, like, all right, cool. I'm not in a good position. I don't want to be here any longer. What can I do to get out of it? You know, take some chances, like try some shit, you know? And, you know, like going, I mean, the whole conversation kind of been about this, but like going back to, you know, just kind of like, you know, pulling yourself out of it, looking at the two sides of what could happen and what could be the worst, you know, case scenario. I think like just, you know, doing that little survey on yourself is really important, you know, as far as like pushing yourself. But there's another thing that comes out of it too. And Mike and I, we talked about this a lot. He actually brought it to my attention, but the concept of like positive anxiety, you know, like when I first heard that, I was like, what? Positive anxiety? You know, like there's like anxiety is terrible. Like, what are you talking about? You know, but you know, I started to think about it and I'm like, no, it's like that fire that you get, you know, to, you know, the little hype, the excitedness you get to like want to show up and like try something different, do something new. And you know, if people could accept that too, I think that would really be like an igniter.
Yeah. No, I think anything you look at can be positive or negative, right? Money can be positive or negative. You know, relationships can be positive or negative. Like you could take anything, and if you take it to an extreme or to a complete, like the other end, it can be good or bad, right? And stress, anxiety are the same things. Like emotions, like people pin anger as this always bad thing. And it's like, you know, sometimes those things are there to move you forward, right? When it's in like a healthy amount, like a little bit of anxiety, you know, a little bit of butterflies in the stomach before you're like making a big jump, like that's a good thing, right? And a little bit of stress here and there is probably going to help you, you know, make that deadline, right? But like when it gets to the point where it's unmanageable or too much or it paralyzes you, it becomes a bad thing. So yeah, I think that's something that like, again, we're quick to like point fingers as something as like good or bad, like this emotion's good or this is a bad emotion. It's like, every emotion I think kind of serves a purpose in a way, like you're saying, like having that little bit of anxiety is good. Being able to get leverage on yourself in some way to take action is hugely important, right? Like you probably projected out like, okay, what does my life look like in 5 years if I stay at this Nautica store? Like, oh, I don't know. I don't like what that looks like. Like that vision maybe pushed you to go do whatever you did. Like for me, there was a lot of times over the past several years, like jumping into entrepreneurship with no clue, no experience, no backup plans. Like I was like, man, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But I would always go back to what does my life look like if I give up? Or if I like go do something that like I hate doing for the next 30, 40 years, like screw that, and like that would always kind of like guide me back and that sort of thing. So it's, I think it's all about kind of understanding those subtleties again, and then being able to get leverage on yourself and understand that like, you hear it all the time. It sounds cliche, and I find a lot of cliches to be true the more I hear them, but like that, I kind of lost my train of thought, but like, you're kind of you're building your story, right? And this is kind of like I don't know if this is getting away from coaching or not, but like just to kind of, I'm sure you guys have heard this too, but like the more shit you're going through, like the more you're gonna be able to look back, or the more prepared you're gonna be for kind of the next chapter. So
yeah. Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, to that point, it builds confidence, like, like Sean talked about, I think it was like last week or something, he's talking about, just the, kind of like just building confidence and putting in the reps, like, and it can be something as small as recording a podcast once a week, or building an entire business up and it freaking burning, but you having the confidence in the fact that like, hey, I did it once, like I can do it again,
Yeah.
And it's the same thing as like as small as like a podcast, I recorded it once, I didn't die, no one freaking made fun of me, and if they did, like fuck them. But if like the biggest thing is like it's just constantly putting in the reps, getting used to running the numbers, and it builds confidence. Like when I heard it in a podcast or something, I don't know, I think it was like Corey Gregory that mentioned it on his podcast, but he said, creating content forces confidence. And within our community, that's one of the biggest things that we see that holds a lot of our coaches back, is they're scared to hold up the phone and, record a TikTok. They're scared to get on a podcast for an interview, or they're scared to even take a sales call. And it's like, like doing this is going to build confidence. You're going to get to a point to where it's just easier and easier. It's just like second nature. So like, what would you rather do? Like conquer your fears and like become confident because of it, or just like sit in your little shell, and like just never take action, like what makes more sense? And it like goes back to what we're talking about here. It's like, look at both sides, like, what do you want? Do you want to stay where you're at, or you want to grow? All right, pick one.
Yeah, the only way you get good at something is by doing it. Like there's no like, people always try to find kind of this other way around it, whether it's producing content or like, I back for CrossFit, like people be like, oh, CrossFit, that's real intense. Like I got to get in shape before I do that. I'm like, well, how are you going to get in shape for CrossFit by doing like not doing CrossFit? Like, or like it's actually the other day, a couple of friends of ours, they're a couple, she asked him like, oh, you want to go hiking or whatever? And he's like, no, like I'm not in shape for hiking. Like I got to get in shape for that. And I'm like, how are you going to get in shape for hiking? Like other than like hiking, like I was like, it's ridiculous. Like you don't get like better at basketball by playing soccer. Like,
exactly.
So yeah, it's like people always try and find kind of that way around. And, I'm guilty of it too at times, is like, oh, how can I put out a lot of content without maybe doing like this kind of content that I know I should be doing, things like that. So it's just something to be aware of, I think.
Yeah, 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Well, cool, man. This was a great convo. Mike, were you gonna say something? Or
no, I think same. Great convo. A lot of good topics covered for sure.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's funny because like whenever we have a good podcast, a good interviewee or whatever you want to call it, it's funny, like the time goes by and I'm like, fuck, like we need like another hour. I'm sure we could talk forever. But yeah, no, it was good to have you on here. Before we wrap it up here, I want to give you a plug, let people know where to find you at, how they can get in touch with you, stuff like that.
Yeah. So for anything Not Most People, and the podcast coaching is kind of all tied to that. Like the podcast coaching brand is called From Lost to Listeners. So basically helping people who are like me, who would never even consider being a podcaster, or like, had the stage fright, didn't know where to start, all that kind of stuff. That's kind of who I really speak to, who I try and work with. Not so much like the mega influencers already who are like, oh, I'm going to start a podcast because my PR person says I need to, or whatever, I want to I want to take that person who is me, who like from the very bottom, no following, no like speaking experience, whatever, and basically bring you up whatever you need to kind of like be crushing it with a podcast, like a legitimate podcast. So that's kind of who I speak to. That brand's called Lost to Listeners. And you can find that all at notmostpeople.net. That's kind of like my home base for everything with the podcast and all that. And then personally, I'd love to connect with anyone on Instagram. That's at Bradley_Roth, or you feel free to shoot me an email, Bradley@notmostpeople.net. So that's probably the best ways to get in touch.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, thanks again, man. Super grateful to have you on. Grateful for another online connection here in the social world. So sure. I'm sure we'll do this again sometime. And thanks again, man.
Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a blast.
For hopping on, man.
Yeah. I'm on the expensive mic today. I might sound a little different. Hey, I wrote this shit for Ronnie. Just know I'm here for you, brother. Reminiscing on them days when I shed a tear for you, brother. Know the toughest days you've been through are in the rear for you, brother. God moves on his own time, and he made it clear to you, brother. See the finish line. I visualize realities I wanted, then invented mine. It ain't how you start, it's how you finish. Word to the scrimmage line.